Hello everyone and welcome to this video podcast on the last days. My name is David and the title of this episode is Incorporating the Three Cleansing and Redemption Projects, Part 1, with a subtitle of Temples, Temples, and More Temples. This is episode 22. In previous episodes, I laid out 9 rules for designing and presenting last days timelines that have proven helpful to me in avoiding the common errors associated with far too many end-time presentations and timelines. But since they were scattered out over 5 episodes, I decided to list them all together so you could easily access them. I would also like to note that if we would but follow rule number 1 and rule number 8, chances are we would never have to worry about breaking the other 7 rules. So let me take a moment to mention these 2 rules once more. Rule number 1 states that there is to be no ignoring a big unknown. And if we would follow this rule, then a great deal of the speculation and eagerness to set future target dates would be avoided. After all, there is not just one big unknown, but at least 2. For in the first place, we have the unknown year of 6000 in God's prophetic timeline, which may or may not line up with the year 2000 AD, and which could easily be off 20, 30, 50, or 70 years or more. And in the second place, we have an unknown number of signs yet to be fulfilled, and which must all be fulfilled before Christ comes in the clouds of heaven. It is important to note that only the Lord knows how many future signs of the times remain to be fulfilled. For without access to all the scriptures, including the brass plates, the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon, the records of the lost tribes, and who knows how many other missing scriptures, there is simply no way of knowing what prophetic signs of the times remain to be fulfilled and must be fulfilled before the second coming of Christ. These 2 big unknowns, then, make it impossible to set future target dates with any degree of confidence or credibility. And so that takes us to rule number 8, which explicitly states that there is to be no designating future target dates for those signs of the times that have yet to be fulfilled, including and especially setting future target dates for the second coming of the Lord. Now, if President Nelson wants to set a future target date, then fine, but President Nelson has stated that he does not know when the Lord is coming. So let's turn to these words once more. People often ask the apostles, when is the second coming going to be? I've got the answer. I don't know. It won't be today or tomorrow because there is much work that needs to be done before that can come. All I know for sure is that we are a day closer today than we were yesterday. The key passage in these words is the comment that there is much work that needs to be done before Christ can come. I mention this because if we could somehow surmise how much work remains to be done before the second coming of the Lord can take place, then we could gain an intelligent opinion on how far out we believe the second coming to be, as well as to what it is we Latter-day Saints should be focused on in order to help move that work along. There are, in fact, 2 ways of gaining an intelligent opinion of what work remains to be done before the coming of the Lord in the clouds of heaven. The first of which is by returning to the 4 phases of the gathering of Israel mentioned in our last episode, episode 21, which clearly indicates, given the magnitude of all 4 phases of this work, that, as President Boyd K. Packer noted, the world is not going to come to an end anytime soon. And the second way is by reintroducing the three major cleansing and redemption projects mentioned in episode 15, which also clearly indicates, given the enormity of all three major projects, that the world is not going to come to an end anytime soon. In many respects, these two approaches to how much work needs to be done before the coming of the Lord is an advance in our thinking on these last days, since both approaches give us a far more comprehensive and bird's-eye view of where we are and where we are heading in the not-too-distant future. But before exploring these two overarching approaches any further, and before making the effort to incorporate these two comprehensive approaches together into one timeline, let us first make a few observations about where we have been and the inherent limitations that this earlier approach embraces. If you'll recall, I stated that my ultimate purpose for this series of episodes on the last days, along with the subtitle of this whole series, which reads Prophetic Timelines Revisited, was to simplify, utilize, and popularize these prophetic timelines by first introducing color-coded fig leaves with a sequential timeline of orange, yellow, and green fig leaves representing those signs of the times already fulfilled, being fulfilled, and yet to be fulfilled. And then providing a last days prophetic timeline template for each of us to follow that was focused on presenting three prophetic themes and perhaps as many as 9 prophetic markers in any one setting. And then I followed this up by providing 2 completed examples of what I had in mind when one follows this prophetic timeline template as laid out. Nonetheless, this simplified and thematic format does have its limitations, so let's take a moment to comment on those limitations. If we return to David J. Ridge's book, 100 Signs of the Times, and take note of the fact that our last day's prophetic timeline template limits us to 3 prophetic themes and perhaps as many as 9 prophetic markers, we discover that it would take perhaps a dozen or more of these presentations before we have exhausted our scriptural studies on the last days and the coming of the Lord. After all, 9 prophetic markers per template would require 11 or 12 templates just to cover the 100 signs of the times presented in David Ridge's book, and there are far more signs of the times than these 100. And so this is why I have introduced several ways of incorporating a far broader, expansive, and comprehensive approach to these latter days to accompany this more limited approach. And that takes us back to the 2 overarching approaches mentioned earlier. So let's turn back to them now, beginning with the 4 phases of the gathering of Israel. Now, when I speak of the 4 phases of the gathering of Israel as being an overarching approach to the last days, I am talking about a big picture approach, as in comparison to the more dialed-in approaches that our prophetic themes and prophetic markers give us. Another way of looking at these various approaches to the last days is to think in terms of the forest, trees, and weeds. Notice that we have all 3 approaches represented here, with the 4 phases of the gathering of Israel representing the big picture or forest approach, and the 3 themes of our template representing the more limited approach of seeing the trees, and the 9 prophetic markers representing getting in the weeds. Other examples from the scriptures of the forest approach would be the parables, such as the parable of the fig tree, of the wheat and the tares, and the 10 virgins. A good example of the more limited and thematic approach would be the 5 themes presented in the 10th article of faith, such as the literal gathering of Israel, the restoration of the 10 tribes, and so forth. And lastly, a familiar example of getting into the weeds is the entire book of Revelation with its 4 beasts, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls or vials, and so forth. But I should point out that most all last days timelines are enthralled with, getting in the weeds, and fascinated by these individual signs of the times, or what I refer to as prophetic markers. I think it is an error to limit one's prophetic timelines to these individual signs of the times or prophetic markers, and so I have introduced a more expansive view with our template's emphasis on both prophetic themes and prophetic markers. And now, by introducing an even broader and overarching view of the last days, we are enabled to see the whole forest at once, which is extremely helpful when one is trying to determine how much work remains to be done before the second coming of the Lord. So let's walk through these 4 phases once more with a few added comments and observations, beginning with Phase 1, which consisted in the gathering to Zion in the early days of the church to America, and with its emphasis on gathering, building the city of Zion, and, most importantly, a temple unto the Lord. In a revelation given to the prophet Joseph Smith in July of 1831, the Lord declared, "Hearken, O ye elders of my church, saith the Lord your God, who have assembled yourselves together according to my commandments in this land, which is the land of Missouri, which is the land which I have appointed and consecrated for the gathering of the saints. Wherefore, this is the land of promise, and the place for the city of Zion. And thus saith the Lord your God, if you will receive wisdom, here is wisdom. Behold, the place which is now called Independence is the center place, and a spot for the temple is lying westward, upon a lot which is not far from the courthouse. Wherefore it is wisdom that the land should be purchased by the saints, that they may obtain it for an everlasting inheritance." And so, yes, both the emphasis on the gathering of Israel, the building of the city of Zion, and the building of temples has been with us from the very beginning and continues to this day. In any event, Phase 1 of these 4 phases of the gathering of Israel began with the gathering to Zion in America in the early days of the church, beginning on April 6, 1830, and ending April 3, 1955, taking a total of 125 years to move us into the second phase. The second phase, the gathering to stakes of Zion worldwide, began in 1955 with President David O. McKay's emphasis on making available all the spiritual blessings of the church worldwide, including access to temples in one's homeland. 2 church historians, James B. Allen and Richard O. Cohen, noted this significant change in the gathering of Zion, and in these words: "Early in his administration, President David O. McKay, the first to travel so extensively as church president, toured missions in Europe, Latin America, Africa, and the South Pacific, dedicating 2 temple sites in Europe and announcing that a temple would be built in New Zealand. In 1955, he declared that the church must put forth every effort within reason and practicability to place within reach of church members in these distant missions every spiritual privilege that the church has to offer. Building temples, increasing the number of missions, organizing stakes worldwide, persuading the saints to build up Zion in their homelands rather than immigrate to America, and eventually putting church leadership into the hands of each country's native people were all significant steps toward fulfilling that goal. This Phase 1 shift from the gathering to Zion in America to Phase 2 and the gathering to stakes of Zion worldwide and within their homelands has been going on clear up to our own day and for some 67 plus years now, and will continue to do so until we enter Phase 3 of this gathering. If we turn our attention now to Phase 3, the gathering to the New Jerusalem as a place of safety and refuge, we will see that it consists in that phase wherein the saints worldwide will flee from the wars and persecutions in their homelands and gather once more to America and to the New Jerusalem as a permanent place of safety and refuge from the judgments that are about to be poured out upon the world. We also have a good indication as to when Phase 2 will end and Phase 3 will begin, for we are told that judgment begins upon the house of the Lord, as stated in Doctrine and Covenants, section 112, verses 24 through 26, wherein we read the following: Behold, vengeance cometh speedily upon the inhabitants of the earth, and upon my house shall it begin, and from my house shall it go forth, saith the Lord. And then we have these words in 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 17 and 18, which reads, For the time is come that judgment must begin at the house of God, and if it first begin at us, what shall the end be of them that obey not the gospel of God? And if the righteous scarcely be saved, where shall the ungodly and the sinner appear? And while we do not know how many years this Phase 3 will last, we do know that Phase 3 continues on up to the second coming of Christ in the clouds of heaven and the destruction of the wicked, which momentous event will take us on into Phase 4, which is the gathering of Israel, which is to take place during the 1,000-year millennial reign of Christ, including the return of the city of Enoch, as well as the enormous temple work that will be taking place both night and day until all the work is finished, and all of scattered Israel on earth and in the spirit world have been gathered. And even if that takes us up to the end of the millennium, or about the year 3000 AD. In the book of Revelation, chapter 3, verse 12, and chapter 7, verse 15, we read, Him that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out. Therefore are they before the throne of God, and serve him day and night in his temple, and he that sitteth on the throne shall dwell among them. In 1856, and in reference to the temple work taking place during the millennium, and within Phase 4 of this gathering of Israel, Brigham Young famously proclaimed that, to accomplish this work there will have to be not only one temple, but thousands of them, and thousands and tens of thousands of men and women will go into those temples and officiate for people who have lived as far back as the Lord shall reveal. With all that having been said, we can now strategically place our prophetic black box in this prophetic timeline between the yellow fig leaf representing Phase 2 and the green fig leaf representing Phase 3, as well as place our reminder that we have no intention of setting any future target dates. We can also locate where we currently are in this timeline and identify the specific gathering phase President Nelson is referring to as the most important thing taking place on earth today. Notice then that we have an approximate date for both the beginning of Phase 1 and Phase 2 of this gathering of Israel, as well as prophetic markers for both the beginning of Phase 3 and Phase 4. Now if one stops and looks at the magnitude of the work that remains to be done within Phases 2 and 3, and before the second coming of Christ in the clouds of heaven can take place, one can begin to appreciate this big picture or overarching perspective of the last days, and as to why President Russell M. Nelson stated that there is much work that needs to be done before the second coming can happen. and why President Boyd K. Packer noted that the world is not going to come to an end anytime soon. Another way of appreciating the magnitude of all that needs to take place before the coming of the Lord is for us, once again, to refer back to David J. Ridge's book, 100 Signs of the Times. If you'll recall, David Ridges not only numbered but designated each sign of the times as being either already fulfilled, being fulfilled, or yet to be fulfilled. And with just a little effort, it was easy to note that he had assigned 8 of 100 signs of the times to the already fulfilled category, and 66 of the 100 to the being fulfilled category, and the remaining 26 of the 100 to the yet to be fulfilled category. What proves interesting is that 7 out of the 8 signs of the times in his already fulfilled category are fulfilled in phase 1 of the gathering, with 66 out of 66 in his currently being fulfilled category being fulfilled in phase 2, and 26 out of the 26 in his yet to be fulfilled category being fulfilled in either phase 3 or phase 4. This amounts to an astounding 99 out of 100, or 99%, of the signs of the times being fulfilled in one or the other of these 4 phases of the gathering of Israel. Now, if you are curious as to which of the already fulfilled signs of the times was outside of phase 1, it was sign 2, which consisted in the discovery of America and the establishment of the United States of America, which obviously took place before the organization of the church in 1830. We have now covered the first of the 2 ways of gaining an intelligent opinion of what work remains to be done before the coming of the Lord in the clouds of heaven. And in part 2, then, we will continue this discussion by covering the second of these 2 ways, that is, by reintroducing the 3 major cleansing and redemption projects. And, in addition to this, we will go on to incorporate these 2 overarching perspectives into a single prophetic timeline instead of 2 separate timelines as you see here. We end then with another prophetic timeline alert by emphasizing the fact that to gain an intelligent opinion of the work that needs to be done before the coming of the Lord, we need an overarching view of the last days. In other words, we need a view of the forest and not a limited view of the trees or weeds. As stated, our next episode, episode 23, will be part 2 of Incorporating the 3 Cleansing and Redemption Projects, with a subtitle of Temples, Temples, and More Temples. Thank you for watching. Push the like button if you enjoyed this episode, and be sure to push the subscribe button. Until next time, stay vigilant, for ye know neither the day nor the hour of his coming.